Okay, welcome everyone to the first episode of the Walking with Jaguars podcast. I'm your host, Matt Blanco, and this is the podcast where we explore everything mysticism, magic, Bitcoin, human experience, freedom, and all that good stuff. And in the first episode, I kind of want to just like lay down this seed of who I am right now and also like my story and my experiences up until this point, just as like an anchor um, for the podcast moving forward. And I plan to have guests on, and this episode zero really just feels like it's going to act as my story, so that when people are 50 podcasts, 100 podcasts, hopefully 1,000 podcasts deep, we can all come back and see the beginning and understand basically the seed of this mission. So, the reason I'm starting this podcast is I've lived quite an interesting life, particularly over the last 7 years. And I've found myself in places that I never thought possible. And I know in the beginning of my like a healing, awakening kind of journey that finding the signal through all the noise is so difficult. It's so hard to find the way forward. And one of my mentors, he did a podcast with a man named Isin on Instagram, and they called it the narrow path. And and that just really resonated with me because it is such a narrow path, especially once you begin to understand how the world works and how we're meant to navigate and all this good stuff. So I guess to start it off, there's this quote, and I don't know who said it, but it is no measure of health to be well adapted to a sick society. And that's something that resonates with me at such a deep level, and hopefully a lot of the listeners too, that you get to a certain level of consciousness and you begin to see how the external world and how culture has started to grow is so against our human nature, and it's so easy to get wrapped up in all the bullshit. So I am a completely ordinary man who has just been blessed with extraordinary teachers, and this is my story. So I grew up in Sydney in a very atheist family, and there was no mention of spirit uh, or anything magical or anything anti-government, may we say. And something never sat well with me where I would look around at all the possibilities for my life and all the careers I could have and even the people I was interacting with. And nothing just seemed to quite click. Nothing seemed to fit. I felt like a black sheep to some degree. And I was having all of these downloads, and like through my teens, I had like crazy insomnia and like all this stuff was coming through, and finding a way to navigate in the world that I was given and in the culture that I was given didn't align with who I was and who I wanted to be. Um, so at first, I was starting to get these downloads of like maybe there's something more than what meets the eye. And although I may not agree with this view anymore, the idea of like, we're monkeys on a Earth that's flicking through space with a sun and all of this, it's extraordinary. Life itself is extraordinary, and the opportunity to experience life is extraordinary, but it just became normal. It was like, no one talks about this. It just is, we all just like get along with it. And what I was starting to like pick up of what this reality was so different. And from the atheistic point of view, I went to university to study quantum mechanics because I was like, surely there's something in academia that aligns with this intuition that's inside of me. And there was pieces, there was breadcrumbs, but it was something that academically didn't make sense. Like mathematically, to some degree, it didn't make sense. But an example of this would be in classical physics. uh, we say reality is real and we observe it. Whereas in quantum mechanics, we say the observation, the participation of the observer is required to create reality in some form. And you can see this in the double slit experiment. Feel free to look it up on YouTube if this is something that you've never heard of. And very quickly, I was like, okay, there's definitely something more going on here. Um, and when I was like 18, I was really wrestling with this idea of meaning and purpose. Like there is something I'm meant to do in this life, but I can't quite work out what it is. And I had this conversation with my father one day. I was like, I feel like I have a purpose. And very quickly, it was just like response was like, you know, you just got to live, just like get a job, just do the thing, you know? And it kind of like took a hold on me, you know, this like program of this conditioning, even though it didn't feel right. And when I was 18, I did LSD for the first time. And it was finally like, oh, okay, this like layer of conditioning of just like living in the mind finally lifted. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I could see. And I remember thinking back then, like, I don't know what this is, but I want to do this. And there was no context for it. We're talking, this is 2015. So although psychedelics are kind of like becoming mainstream now, they were still very taboo back then. Like the consensus was, you know, these plant medicines fry your brain. Um, but when this conditioning lifted, it gave me choice that I'd never experienced before, where it was like, oh, I can just, you know, change friend groups, change friends, change my relationship, change my career, change the music I listen to, change the books that I read, change the way I navigate life in a whole. And I'd never experienced that before because there was always so many shoulds, the shoulds of society, the shoulds of my parents, the shoulds of the culture, the shoulds of my friends. And to some degree, like everyone experiences this, and they're like the invisible leashes that pull us through life. And everyone gets to the point where they're like, enough is enough, I think. I mean, not everyone, but like a lot of people. And sometimes that happens when you're 18, I guess in my case, or maybe 25, 30, 40, 50, 60. Um, but that opportunity is always there to make that pivot from running on autopilot and running on what everyone else says versus running on who you are at your deepest core and the choices that you want to make and the future possibilities you want to open for yourself. So after that first LSD experience, things changed in my life very quickly, you know, and I started to realize that what I had experienced in that ceremony of sorts had nothing to do with what I'd been told, but me just experiencing. And then from that point onwards, I was like, okay, I want to change the way I show up. I want to be a more joyous person, you know? I want to tell my family I love them more. I want to appreciate nature more. I want to change the music I listen to. And then also like finding Eastern philosophy and looking into things like meditation and yoga and expanding the horizons of what was laid out for me. Um, and at that time, funny enough, now it seems almost crazy because Joe Rogan's just like so big. But it was really finding him talking about psilocybin in a way that was drastically different than everyone else that I was like, okay, he gets it. He understands that like he's had these experiences and this thing can change the world. Um, so not long after that, there was a podcast with Joe Rogan and Graham Hancock. And Graham Hancock was talking about ancient civilizations and that humanity may have the story wrong, you know. And when we look at history, we're looking at his story, just this victor, this like the story of culture versus the truth. and he had a TED talk about ayahuasca. And when I listened to that, it was immediate. Like, as soon as he said the word ayahuasca, boom, like all the hair on my body stood up. And I just felt this like great realignment of my life where very quickly all these ideas of like, oh, this career or this relationship, they'd all just dissolved. And it was like the North Star is ayahuasca now. And I didn't know why. I didn't have the rational understanding of why, but I just knew it so deeply in my soul that this was something that was going to lead me in the right direction. And then pursuing this idea of like, what is ayahuasca? What are they talking about? What are these like, you know, are these segments of indigenous wisdom throughout the world? And every time I introduced myself to indigenous ways of thinking, there was even more coherence in a worldview and of the human experience. And when I was looking into ayahuasca, it's a combination of the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna plant, but it has to be created in a certain way and harvested and brewed to create this medicine. And when they asked the natives, "How did you find the combination?" they would say, "The plants told us." From the worldview that I had at that point in time, plants and nature to some degree were just a backdrop to what life was. And now this is drastically inversed, where like nature is reality and everything else is some kind of constructed matrix of sorts. But when I heard that the plants told them, I immediately was like, okay, there's something happening in this world, in this reality that I have not tapped into, that I'm really starting to believe there is truth there. And this was also like, you always need data to create frameworks. And like working with psilocybin, it's like this thing just comes out of the ground and it just happens to have all the right chemical structures that create this experience in the human brain. And you can be like, okay, coincidence, coincidence, coincidence. But there comes a point where the data begins to build up so drastically that it's like, okay, no, this is like actually coherence, not coincidence. Um, so North Star was just going to the jungle to experience ayahuasca. So I finished university and I graduated with my physics degree, which is now a fantastic piece of paper somewhere in my parents' cupboard. Um, and that's kind of when like my life actually started. And that's like the life that I chose entirely versus like having pieces of choices. So I flew to South America, and within 3 days of landing there, I met my now fiance, who will soon be my wife, who is just the greatest gift, and just had this cascade of blessings and learnings. The growth that I experienced was so rapid, and there was like lots of initiations to some degree along my path. And so like I was in South America and I didn't have any connections of like where to go and drink ayahuasca. And then also like I had hesitancy to find something online because there's so much like westernization of culture in general, especially when we're talking about the indigenous, where like these are not savvy business people, but people want to experience this. So the Westerners like orchestrate these experiences in this kind of twisted way. Um, so I just set out for a year-long trip across South America, and I basically went from the Caribbean coast of Colombia all the way down to Chile by the end, over the span of 9 months. And I summited, 5,000-meter mountains. I like connected with a lot of interesting people, different cultures too. One of the peak ones was I was basically just in hostels, and every time I'd meet someone who was relatively interesting, I'd just be like, "What's the coolest thing you've done?" And I was really seeking these like peak experiences at that point in my life. And this woman was like, I worked in a sanctuary in Bolivia walking jaguars on leashes. And instantly I was like, this is something that I have to go and do. So I was in Bolivia in the middle of the jungle, no power, no running water, sleeping on a straw bed. And on the first day, they hand this contract to me about like my volunteering work there. And the contract basically said, like, you are completely responsible for everything that happens. Even if something goes wrong, we're not responsible for like medical attention and all of this stuff. And I was like, okay, I'm here now. I just like have to do it, sign the paper, hand it over. And they basically take me straight out to see the jaguar that I'd be working with for the next 3 months. And we're walking out there, and I'm actually starting to get nervous. This like egotistical young man being like, I could fucking do anything, really started to set in, being like, oh, can I actually do this? And I asked the guide who was training me initially, like, what do I do if the jaguar turns on me? And he said, you stick your left hand in her mouth. And I was like, okay, why would that be the thing to do? He goes, well, it's better she takes your hand than she bites your organs. And I was like, okay, we're in for it now. And we get out there and she hears us coming and she's right up against the fence. Her eyes are like super wide, new person trying to work out what's going on. And she's in a pen that's the size of a football field out in the middle of the jungle. She's a 45-minute hike through like virgin Amazon rainforest to get to her. And it's all fully overgrown inside the pen. And that was like the beginning of this like amazing era of like really living in the jungle and like connecting with these animals. And I guess just for some context, like what this sanctuary was, it was all animals that were either taken off the black market or they were found injured and they were there for rehabilitation reasons. Um, so yeah, we'd go out into the jungle. I'd spend 5 hours a day with the jaguars. I would put them on leashes and I would hike through the jungle, and it was just unbelievable. And that is where the name of this podcast comes from, Walking with Jaguars. And although that is like the seed of the idea was having this experience with the jaguars, the name, what it really represents to me is all these brilliant teachers that I've had along the way. And these teachers, they're always powerful individuals, like different in stature, different in age, different in all these things. But the way that they like pull you through life, it's like the spirit of the jaguar. And I had one mentor in particular, and one day he said to me, like, I'm at the front and I have the machete and I'm swinging through the jungle. And like you, as the apprentice, your role, this is all figuratively, your role is like to tell me if there's a snake coming or there's a jaguar or there's like, something out there that's going to get me or like a snake if it bites me. And when the day comes that like I fall, it's your job to pick up this machete and keep swinging and guide the people behind you. And like that's the spirit of the jaguar. And that's the name, Walking with Jaguars. It's like these people who navigate life in an exceptional way. Like these are my teachers. Um, so I'm down in the jungle. I'm still trying to find ayahuasca. And I'm meeting all these interesting people and these connections. And I'm searching, but I'm not like I'm seeking, but I'm not gonna like take this experience. Somehow I knew that I've been called and she will find me. And then one day I'm just in a hostel and this person's like, hey, this is where you should go. They serve really good medicine there. This is where I do my diets. And at that point, I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but I trust you. So I trust that this is the right place to go. So I connect with the maestro out in the jungle, and he's Shipibo and speaks relatively broken Spanish because he speaks Shipibo, and I speak virtually no Spanish at this point. So I organize Google Translate to go out and see him. So I fly to Iquitos, which is the largest city in the world not accessible by road. It's literally in the middle of the jungle if you look at it on a map. And the whole city is like 500,000 people out there, basically like living in the jungle, turning into sprawling, somewhat decrepit city. It seems to have improved a lot over the last 6 years with all the ayahuasca tourism. But I go out there, so I'm 22 at this point. I go out to the jungle. I take a tuk tuk to the edge of town. I get on a boat. We go 3 hours upriver, and then I get out of the boat, and then I hike based on instructions that were sent to me on Facebook Messenger how to get to the sanctuary. So I hike in an hour and I land there. And I'm like, okay, this is the moment. Like I've been preparing for this for we're coming on 4 years now. And I get out there and I have no idea what's going on. I have no context or understanding of like how the ceremonies take place, uh, what I'm meant to be doing, where I'm meant to be going. And I basically get there and they're just like, gringo, go here, gringo, go there. You know, no electricity, no water, no Wi Fi. Like, bathroom is just a hole. And that was the first time I like interacted with that medicine. And now ayahuasca, like, she interacts with everyone differently. And I'd made this journey out there and I did my first four ceremonies. And although like some visions were opening and some things were happening and there was like some purging happening, it wasn't this like ultra profound experience. And I was like, man, I don't know what's going on here. I really thought this was the thing. And after the 4-day ceremony, I left still with basically no understanding of like the culture or what any of it means. I was just fasting in a hut during the days, and they'd come and grab me and take me into the Maloka in the evenings. And I left being like, I have no idea if I'll be back. Like, this was such an arduous journey. Like, to get from Sydney to the middle of the jungle, out 4 hours outside of Iquitos, is like, it's literally the other side of the planet. And so I left there. I continued my journey, and it just, although there was like things connecting and like spirit was happening and these learnings were happening, I was so sure it was the thing. And it just did not come together. So, yeah, back to traveling. And then I was so in love with Emily at this point. And she'd gone back to Canada months ago. And I was pretty much done in South America. Like, after living in the jungle for 3 months, I just had like, I'd lost like a bunch of weight. I had like mold growing all over me because it was the middle of the wet season. So we were like waist deep in the Amazon basin basically all day. And I was ready to leave South America. So I told Emily, hey, I'm flying to Canada. Let's like live a ski bum kind of life. And she was like, don't come. Like, moving to BC in the middle of winter to live in a car is a terrible idea. And I did not want to go home to Australia. Like, it felt like there was nothing left for me there. So just full send, went to Canada. We bought a car for like 4 grand. And then, it was decked out with like a bed in the back and like a kitchenette. And we ended up living in this like ashram in Nelson, and that's where I met like one of my first like really fantastic teachers. His name was John Scott, and just an absolutely epic dude. He was probably 60 when I met him, and he'd lived in an ashram for 5 years, and he was just the most disciplined person I'd ever met. Where his way of mastering consciousness was like it was just discipline. And just like ways to describe it, I guess. One day he took the group of us that were living there and we went and did like a shamanic breath work. So you're just breathing like hardcore for an hour, and your body starts to actually seize up. You get this thing called tetany, where you'd have like claw hands, and it's so painful, but to some degree, it's also visionary and it's like quite profound. And when the experience was over, like we were talking to him and like decompressing and everything, and he kind of just subtly goes, "Yeah, like my teacher showed me this, and then I just did it every day for a year, didn't miss a day." And it was such an intense experience. Like, how often do we in life say we're going to do something and then do it for a couple days or a week or maybe even a month when we're like super disciplined? But to do something that's like kind of that extreme, that discipline for that amount of time, it's just like, okay, wow, like it's really that discipline is there. And like another example is he'd do this breath work out in the like on the side of the mountain, welcoming the sunrise every day. And same thing again. It was like an hour long routine. And he hadn't missed a day in 35 years. He was such a fantastic teacher for me. Um, but while I was there, I just knew, like, this is not my path. Like, I understand and I respect it, and I can see the level of consciousness like he's able to hold on a day to day basis. But this is just not mine. And the place was also vegan. Not that John was vegan, but the place was vegan because there was a bunch of kind of hippie people around. And I just couldn't do it. My body was breaking down. So I would go and on Sundays, I'd like go into town and then just eat a whole rotisserie chicken in the car park just to kind of recharge and like get all my protein. But through that period, I was really like trying to work out why I am the way I am and why I do the things the way I do. And me and I was living there with Emily, and we decided that if we're gonna eat meat, we got to learn how to like raise cattle and slaughter cattle and be part of the process and see that. So we went onto this app Workaway, and we typed in uh, like cattle ranch husbandry meditation or something. And this place popped up, and it was the only one. And instantly I was like, this is the place. I didn't know why. Like this glow inside of me was just like, this is the place. So we reach out to this person and we get in contact with her, and we have this like maybe like half hour 45-minute long conversation like, oh, you know what's your experience working on farms and ranches, and are you a good fit, and this is like the contract that we're kind of going to work forward on. And then right at the very end of the conversation, she said like, hey, I looked in your profile and I saw that you've both been to South America. We were like, yeah. And she was like, have you heard of ayahuasca? And we were like, yeah. She was like, have you done ayahuasca? And we were like, yeah. And she was like, okay, great. Um, we also run ayahuasca ceremonies here. And it was like divine, like the divine alignment of how this thing happened. So we left the ashram, we moved up with her, and we lived there for just over a year. And that was my next teacher. She was just absolutely incredible. She's still like, my spiritual mama to this day. And this was the first time where it was like the shamans that we're working with were really well trained and with the natives, and they would come up and they would run the ceremonies on the land, and the ceremonies were super tight, like how they were run. And the expansion of consciousness really begun to happen at this point, and like the profound visions, and then also like being able to speak English and decompress and understand like how all of this stuff works. And I guess is like somewhat of a tangent just to describe like the experience of ayahuasca if it's not something that people have experienced themselves. We look at something like a mushroom experience, right? It's a profound experience in its own right. And the thing is that in the West right now, we have all the medicines or access to all the medicines, basically, but we don't have any of the teachers. Whereas, like, when you look in indigenous settings, there was always the medicine man, there was always the shaman who, like, came from a lineage or who apprenticed for, like, many years of, like, how to use these things. And when you're at home trying to create these profound ceremonies, you only know so much, you know? Whereas, like, when we look at, say, the family that I work with in in the world of ayahuasca, they're an unbroken native lineage that goes back to the Incas. So we're talking thousands of years. And over the span of thousands of years, they've fine-tuned, they've trialed and tested everything you could possibly imagine to make the single most profound experience of your life. And through these like ceremonies that I was partaking in, it was like it was like the great remembering who I am, like my purpose, my soul, what I was placed on this world to do, where I should be putting my attention, where I need to change certain things, the things I need to clear, the things that I'm holding on to that I no longer want to, they no longer serve me, you know, cutting these like invisible leashes off to be free in my spirit, you know, and in the way that I show up in the world. And then through this process, like a lot of people drink ayahuasca, right? It's like, it's not something that is super small anymore. You know, there's like big celebrities on big podcasts talking about ayahuasca, this, that. But ayahuasca itself is like, it's just the centerpiece of this entire medical system that the Shipibo people or like the real wisdom keepers of this medicine have. And attached to that is these things called dietas, the master plant dietas. And this is where we're working with non-psychoactive plants and we're interfacing with them on these like spiritual and physical levels over many months. And it's like to some degree, it's kind of like the beginning of apprenticeship, but that is the real ayahuasca, you know? Like people go and have their experiences, but like the dieta is like where the real healing happens. And like my teacher, he even says to people, like, you know, they'll come and drink 50 times and they're like, I don't feel like I'm like making any more improvements. And it's like, yeah, I mean, like ayahuasca can only take you so far. Like you need to do the dietas. Um, and then on that land, that ranch, that's why I did my first 3 month dieta. And that's when like a lot of stuff really started to click into place where my understanding of nature vastly expanded. Now when I look out at the world, like I said, you know, nature is not the backdrop anymore. They're like the living, breathing, true ancestors and guides of this land. And like the Lakota people say, they say like we the humans, like we're the youngest, you know, like we come here with our like memories gone, and like we need to learn. We're like babies, you know, and like these plants and these spirits, like they're the teachers who the level of consciousness that they're at and the things that they can convey to us and help us with is so far beyond what any therapist, you know, or any counselor or any podcast could possibly convey. Um, so that was like my first big initiation. And I guess this was like a little fun tidbit as well. When the first ceremony I drank on that land and my visions just like fully opened up, ayahuasca showed me that she knew that I would end up there. It was like written. So when I was down in the jungle, she felt like I wasn't ready yet and didn't want to like start showing me like all the magic. So in that first ceremony, she was actually showing me the things that she was working on me in those ceremonies too, which is pretty amazing. And then so that was the first big big breadcrumb, first big realignment in my life. And then I went and found a new teacher through the ceremonies. And I apprenticed under him for 5 years and absolutely changed my life. Hard lessons, you know. I was just like a young 22-year-old. He was like a, you know, very intelligent, lot of experience 40-year-old man who took me under his wing and, taught me the ways of not only medicine, but entrepreneurship and how to be in relation with your partner and with other people and how to show up in a certain energy in this world. Like really, to be honest, like how to be a man, versus be a boy. And I moved in with him, and that's when the next really big initiation begun, which was finding the signal of Bitcoin. And there is so much noise when it comes to Bitcoin. There's also so much noise when it comes to plant medicines, and the people who drink medicine and have all these like spiritual consciousness awakenings to the world, they find it very difficult to align their life with the things that they now know and they understand, you know, where like they come to medicine, they have these beautiful experiences, they create these beautiful relationships with the other people there, they do this cleaning, they do this healing, and then they still go to their 9 to 5 that they hate every day. And Bitcoin is like the cure to that. It's the thing that creates harmony between the spirit and the material world. So I moved into this house. There was 5 of us in this house, and the Bitcoin started to kind of trickle in of what this thing is. And then very quickly, it just completely got away from us, where the 5 of us would basically listen to 12 hours of podcasts about Bitcoin and audiobooks about Bitcoin and reading articles about Bitcoin and finding all the Bitcoin Yodas that have been in the space for like, at that point, like 10 years almost. um, and then we'd like all gather at the dining table for dinner, and it would just be like spitting all the codes of how Bitcoin is this like great realignment force in the world. It's this black hole that will just swallow everything and basically be the thing that sparks like the next level of human consciousness to some degree. And I would like to have lots of Bitcoin people come on and speak on this podcast, because like we can definitely get into like the nitty gritty technical aspects of it, because there's so many ways that this technology interacts with reality. Um, it was really the thing that allowed me to understand that I could really live the life that I wanted. Like exactly, like there was no longer a incoherence between what I was experiencing in ceremony and how I would live my life. Uh, and through COVID, I was like just doubling down, doubling down, doubling down on Bitcoin. And then as soon as everything opened up again, I moved to Costa Rica to basically live on a Bitcoin standard. um, because it's just freedom at the end of the day. And if I know there's a lot of people out there who have like a lot of programming around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all of this. I'm not talking about cryptocurrency. Anything that's not Bitcoin is just trash. It's all just sad gambling that will go to zero. Um, and it's proof of work that is the magic. So now I live in Costa Rica. I have 2 cats that are named after the sanctuary of the jaguars that I lived at. I have a fiance who is a beautiful medicine woman and teacher and healer. And I never could have experienced or never thought that my life would end up the way it did 7 years ago. And I feel like it's really just the beginning for me. So, what has all of this led to? These initiations, these changes in my being. There was the in the philosophy of the Incas, there is four bodies. There is the physical body, there is the emotional body, there is the spiritual body, and there is the mind. And one thing they talk about is that the mind, to some degree, is it shows the balance of the other three. Where if the other three are out of whack in some kind, the mind will be out of whack. And if the other three are in balance, the mind will just become glass. So we look at this journey and like on my physical body, like growing up, I had like all the childhood vaccines. I ate all the shitty food. We had a bottle of Coca-Cola on the table at dinner time. And that led to a lot of problems inside of myself where, my guts were all messed up. I would have like eczema all over my legs, just like generally getting sick quite a lot. Um, I mean, especially throughout like my university years, but that was also to do with the very heavy drinking and partying and frat boy behavior of that time, which is now very gratefully behind me. Um, and since walking this path and like reconnecting with my spirit and reconnecting with the things I want to achieve and connecting with the plant medicines and the indigenous wisdom keepers, so much of it is healed. Like after my first dieta, I never had eczema again. Like it's deep, deep healing at a cellular level. And it has nothing to do with the understanding of how pharmaceuticals work to some degree, where it's like, oh, you take this thing and this dose, and this is the thing that happens. We're talking about like clearing not only physical toxicity, but now getting into the emotional body. We're clearing trauma out of the body. We're clearing the things that lock us up and do not allow the energy to flow. So, an example of this is if you ever see a lion take a gazelle on the Sahara, the gazelle only has three options. It can either fight, it can flight, or it can freeze. Now, if the lion has already grabbed the gazelle, it's freezing. It's not getting away, so there's really no point to struggle, and it's not fighting. But if the lion loses its like focus for a second and the gazelle does get away, when it gets back to the herd, it will literally fall to the ground and have a seizure. And it's like the process of like energetically releasing the tension that was created in that experience. But us as humans, something happens to us and then we just think about it. We don't know how to like physically process and release the things that happen to us. And that's one of the beautiful things about ayahuasca is you drink the medicine and you'll feel the medicine like grab onto something. It'll start like twisting and scraping and clearing this like energy. And then you may even start having visions of like what this density is in the body. And then you will literally throw it up, and it's like you're releasing that energy. So we're getting the physical body cleaner, we're getting the emotional body cleaner, and then the spiritual body. It's like my teacher, he says, like the humans, like we're a funny species. We celebrate by killing ourselves. It's like, oh, it's our birthday, like let's go get fucked up. Oh, someone's having a wedding because they're getting married, let's go get fucked up. It's like every time like the energy is good and the consciousness and the vibes are high, it's like we intentionally like spearhead them into the ground because subconsciously we actually don't want to feel good for whatever reason. So when we're looking at the spiritual body, my teacher, he says, we're all just looking for something sacred, and like in this life, we're able to do a lot of things, but like the power of prayer, which seems like from my upbringing as like an atheist to like actually now my understanding of what the power of prayer is so different. And it's like we're here to pray, and life is actually just like a refinement of our prayer, and that was a big piece of me starting this podcast. Of I love having conversations with people. I love talking about, the medicine and Bitcoin and freedom and following my curiosity. And this is a way for me to share my prayer and to refine my prayer, and everyone's out here with like these, this framework is so different than what we're taught. Like when we look at the way society and the way the pharmaceutical industry describes the mind and like depression and anxiety and all of these like mental disorders, it's like it's this completely separate thing. Oh, you just like something's out of balance, where in reality, it's like everything in your life is out of balance, and the mind is basically just sending that feedback to you to let you know that things are out of whack. And that's the same with like all symptoms, like anytime a symptom arises in the body, it's just something is out of balance, and it's actually there as like the check engine light being like something needs to change. It's like the last thing you want to do is like knock the check engine light out and put some band-aid fix on top of it. um, so yeah, living in Costa Rica, walking the plant medicine path, living on a Bitcoin standard, being a digital nomad, maximizing freedom in all aspects of my life, and just here to have really good quality conversations with people I find interesting as somewhat of a beacon or a signal through the noise. Because I know finding all these things was so difficult for me, and it took such a long time to piece everything together. But now I'm really at a point where like the meaning in my life and the purpose I feel in my life are like sky high across the board. And if I can share that with honestly anyone, of just helping them realign their life to what they wish they could live, or like even understand like what they actually want. So many people are walking around with no idea of what they even want as an individual, because everything has always been what someone else has told them to want. So yeah, lots of conversations with interesting people, and just finding a way to navigate into this crazy future of, you know, insane government overreach and AI and the pharmaceutical industries and the fiat system, just like everything that makes it so hard just to be. So, yeah, this is about future proofing the bloodline. So, I know I would have loved this when I was 18, and I hope I can, you know, change some lives along the way. So, this is it. Welcome to the Walking with Jaguars podcast. I'm Matt Blanco, and let the games begin. Till the next one, all my relations. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed the show. If you did enjoy the show, don't forget to like and subscribe below. It really helps a growing channel like this out. And click up here. It'll take you to a collection of the best this podcast has to offer.